Welcome. I'm Leslie Noymer at the Massachusetts State House in Boston to spotlight State Senator Barbara L'Italian of the 2nd Essex and Middlesex District. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I really appreciate it.
So why don't we get started?
Okay.
Would you please talk to us about what will be going on in the State House over the next year, including what's likely to impact or spur economic development, job creation, early and higher education, or public safety issues? Whatever.
Okay, well, that's quite a question.
Well,
I might need some reminders on it.
Take the ball and run with it.
Let's see. I would say that the first order of business beginning in January was to close the budget gap that had occurred due in large part to the failure issues with the Massachusetts Health Connector. And so because there was great difficulty with people being able to sign on and figure out whether in fact they fully qualified, many people were carried over that were low income rather than having them lose coverage. So that accounted for a good portion of about a $729 million shortfall that had to be closed this year. So I guess in my second session, we had to vote to make a number of cuts, actually. The governor needed to make what are called 9C cuts, which are cuts totally within his purview, and then some others as well to balance the books. So I think ongoing there's a question of whether or not, until we have this all straightened out in terms of MassHealth eligibility, there still may be a $1.5 billion deficit somewhere around there. So as we look into the budget cycle, which is beginning now, that will certainly be one of the things we have to do. Certainly anyone in the viewing audience that takes public transportation to work is aware of the issues with both Keolis and MBTA that have been occurring due in large part to the record snowfall. But it also pointed out a lot of the underfunding that's happened in terms of capital improvement to train cars and tracks and things like that. And so that's an ongoing issue, how we're going to really get both the MBTA and Keolis, who carry their trains out of Andover, to be back on track. As we speak here, the second week in March, the train service is still not at full tilt and still not expected until the end of March. So I imagine that will be a large issue looming over the next year, and it absolutely impacts economic development because if people can't get to work or can't get to work on time, there are huge issues. What else? Let's see. There will be probably further discussions around healthcare and its affordability. We've sort of mastered healthcare coverage here in the state. We're at about 97% coverage, but how we make it more affordable, how we enable small business owners to be able to group together for bulk buying so that they are able to leverage those numbers to drive down the cost of premiums for them. How we are going to rein in the growth within MassHealth, as I mentioned earlier, but also just, are there ways of delivering service within healthcare that will either cut back or curb the growth of the cost, because healthcare costs are affecting individual homes, they're affecting local town budgets in terms of their spending on healthcare for their employees, and it's certainly affecting the state as well. We have the Group Insurance Commission, or GIC, which is dealing with a deficit of their own that we're going to need to come to grips with as well. I also think we will probably tackle the opioid addiction crisis. There were some things done last session.
Good.
There were some ways in which it was made easier for people with addiction to have access to treatment, to make sure that insurers cover that treatment. But there are still many other areas within opioid addiction that we're going to need to take a look at.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I know it's on everyone's mind.
Absolutely, and as you know, unfortunately, we've had a few young people now pass away due to overdoses, and one person is one too many. And so we really do need to take a look at that.
A lot on your plate.
Yes, yeah.
Which brings me to my next question, which we know how busy you are. You have a 90-year-old mother who lives at home with you.
Yes.
You have 4 children, 2 of who live at home right now.
Correct.
And you've recently been named to 9 different committees.
Yes.
So
it's a lot of work.
How do you balance all this?
Well, let's see. I have wonderful staff that will help me with many aspects of the research, and you know, when constituents are calling, I have 2 folks that are dedicated full-time to you know, working on those issues, and if it involves an issue with a state agency, they will do the legwork on my behalf. Yeah, it's going to be a real juggling act. I will chair municipalities, which is basically all 351 cities and towns have the ability to pass home rule petitions. So we at town meeting in Andover will pass home rule petitions, and those are then brought to the State House, and those would come before my committee. So it'll be a lot of things from all over the state. It'll be very interesting to learn more about each community by virtue of what they're aiming to work on or fix. Probably the single largest policy issue that will come before my committee will be zoning reform, and that hasn't been done in over 30 years. So it was attempted last session. It got close to being passed. There were some issues raised, and it did not proceed forward. So we have the benefit of looking at the piece of legislation that was brought forward last year. There's another piece of legislation that also speaks to zoning. And so the trick for me will be working with my House chair to sit down with all parties involved and trying to hammer out a solution. So that's what I'm chairing, is municipalities. I'm vice chairing Elder Affairs, which is great because that was my background prior to being a legislator. I'm really looking forward to working with my Senate Chair, Pat Jalen, on elder issues. And in fact, the largest, the signature piece of legislation that I've filed this year centers around making the home care program for seniors more accessible. So allowing seniors, expanding who qualifies by income qualification. It doesn't mean they wouldn't necessarily pay a portion of that care, but right now, if you don't qualify, you end up with no care whatsoever. And I just think it's smart to allow people to get some assistance. With you know, with some assistance, they can frequently stay in their homes, avoiding a nursing home stay. I'm also vice chairing Intergovernmental Affairs, which will look to bring federal monies back into the state of Massachusetts. There are many things that we could do with minor changes to our forms or regulations or whatever that could help bring more money back to the state. So we're going to be looking at that. And I'm also going to be vice chairing a committee on innovative and alternative education. Oh, wow. And that's going to look at where are the innovators, what kinds of things are happening, where are people raising the bar, and we want to know about it so that we can share that information with other schools. So although the press had termed it as looking at innovation through charter schools, there may be innovations there, but there are many wonderful innovations happening in our public schools as well. As you know, I just came off the end of our school committee. What we were doing with project-based learning and some of the other online learning things is really great. And I think we're going to look for ways in which innovation is being used to help address science, technology, engineering, and math. We're going to be looking at ways in which innovation is helping kids who may have dropped out of school and are coming back into school. Ways in which we are helping folks with disabilities learn and folks with English as a second language learn. So I look at it as innovation across the board to all different types of learners. And then as far as my other committees go, I am on education, which is really K through 12, which is great. I'm also on higher education, and that's wonderful since we have Northern Essex Community College as a public higher ed institution right in our backyard in Lawrence, and of course we have Merrimack College, private institution on the North Andover line. And I'm also on healthcare finance, which is going to tackle that issue of healthcare affordability. I am on economic development and small business. And I'm on a redistricting committee as well, because the census is done every 10 years, and based on population shifts and what have you, you know, the lines need to be redrawn every 10 years. And I know for some people in Andover there was great concern around the way some of the precincts were drawn in Andover. We are a split town. We have 2 congressmen. Mm-hmm. We have Seth Moulton for part of town, Nikki Songas for another part of town. But particularly in a couple of the precincts in 7 and in 9, people were split, and there were just a couple of neighborhoods, very few voters. So hopefully we can do this a better way next time out, but this redistricting committee will begin to take the steps towards what you need to have, what information needs to be prepared and ready when the next redistricting comes up.
Very comprehensive answer, thank you.
Yeah.
You do a lot of community outreach, and listening to your answer, you use the word help all the time, which is really phenomenal. And you've had these listening tours, and recently you were in Lawrence, and you had a community forum, and 13 senators attended, which is phenomenal.
Yes, there were 8 listening tours. All the Senate was split up into 8 districts, and I was in basically the North Shore of Merrimack Valley region. And there were 7 of us together, and we started our day at 6:30 in the morning in Burlington, went on to Melrose, Lynn, Danvers, North Andover, and then we finished the tour in Lawrence, which of course is in my Senate district. And we had the listening tour at Salvatore's at the Riverwalk.
The turnout is great. This is fantastic. Give yourselves a round of applause. We've got close to 300 people here, so I think that that's just fantastic. I'm going to quickly make some introductory remarks, and then I think we're going to try to just get started so we can get to as many of you as we possibly can. I'm Barbara L'Italian. For those of you who don't know, I am the new senator for this district for Lawrence, Andover, Dracut, and Tewksbury. I have replaced Barry Feingold most recently. I'm sure there are many of you here who may not be from my district. You may be from Katie O'Connor Ives' district as well. But I'd like to just start by introducing the panel and tell you about some of the folks that are here as well from some of the cities and towns.
How about a round of applause for our brand new state senator who brought all these people here to listen to what we have to say in front of the Senate President. Thank you very much, Barbara L'Italian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Senator Michael Rodrigues from Westport, Greater Fall River. It's really an honor to be here this evening for the 3rd of 8 open public forums throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to listen to all of you. In order to be fair to everyone, we're going to attempt to listen to everyone's concerns. I don't know if we're going to have enough time. If anyone's got, any sort of written comments, please submit them because we will read them.
Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Minority Leader, members of the Senate. My name is Joe Bevilacqua. I'm the President and CEO of the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce, headquartered here in Lawrence, representing 1,000 businesses from the companies that employ tens of thousands of people down to the single-person startup. First, let me say thank you for being here. The fact that you are here recognizes the fact that there are, in fact, different regions in the state of Massachusetts, that there is a royal outside of Boston. And that's one issue I want to ask you to consider as you develop programs and policies and opportunities, to recognize that communities like the Merrimack Valley need your assistance. We abut tax-free New Hampshire. We constantly talk to businesses that, in fact, it is more expensive to do business in New Hampshire rather than here in the Merrimack Valley. So please keep that in mind. The second issue is wanting you to be aware of the fact that the Merrimack Valley Chamber has taken education, workforce development, and economic development as its goals. We look forward to working with you. We know that we're going to be successful together. And the fact that you are here, to all of these people here and those that will be watching, is a testament to the fact that you care about the work we're doing here. I just want to say thank you. Particular thanks to our local legislators who I think do a tremendous job. But Mr. President, thank you.
We had over 300 people attend. And it was really remarkable because it was an hour and a half of just listening. People getting 2 minutes to say whatever was on their mind, whatever issue they were concerned about. There was a whole host of issues, from people asking for consideration on the Kinder Morgan gas pipeline, to people that had concerns about particular social service agencies, budgetary line items, real estate priorities. And the most interesting one was a honeybee keeper who was concerned about the collapse of the honeybees and what that means in terms of our ability to produce food. And so it really ran the gamut. You know, as you mentioned, there were 13 senators there, including the Senate President and the Senate Minority Leader. And it was a really remarkable opportunity for a whole bunch of people sitting up at the dais to just listen. And then we'll take that information, aggregate it, and from that, it will inform some of the priorities for this 2-year session.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
I particularly hadn't thought of that with the honeybees.
Right.
So once they gather all the information, you know, do they have the budget and the, you know, the resources to do something about?
Well, I think that you have to, you know, all government is incremental, and you have to first listen, gather the facts, identify the problem, think about the different solutions, and then figure out what's manageable and doable over time. And so not everything is going to be gotten to immediately, but it at least allows us to understand what the priorities are out there, what we should be paying attention to. Some things just came up over and over and over because I have attended 3 of these listening sessions. And so I was also at the Metro West one and at the Greater Boston one. And there are just certain themes that are coming up over and over. And so as those things rise to the top, I think that we will, you know, we will take a long, hard look at them. And some of them are issues of long standing that we're very much aware of and still very much working on. Some things don't have easy answers. Some things are going to require an incredible infusion of money that we just don't have this budgetary year. So, but it's really important to know what's on people's minds and try to see what you can do. There was a lot of talk as well of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. At every one of them that I went to, there were people very concerned that they'd like to see us pass a constitutional amendment here in Massachusetts and send it down to Washington, D.C. If enough states do that, it will require the federal legislature to take up the issue and reconsider whether or not we believe that corporations are equated with people, which I do not believe. Yeah, in terms of campaign funding and all. It really, you could see it in this last election cycle, the ability for, you know, wealthy billionaires to infuse money into the federal races, but also into the governor's races as well. So that was one issue that I heard everywhere I went.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You spent 8 years in the House of Representatives. Talk to us about the differences in the 2 bodies and what advantages you might have in getting things done now as a senator.
Okay. Well, I mean, the House, you're one of 160 people, much larger, much more difficult to rise up through the ranks to get a chairmanship or a vice chairmanship. But what I loved about it was the collegiality. And so, for example, when I was a freshman rep, you sat in this big room called the bullpen with 22 other freshman legislators and their staff person. So there were 44 of us in a room, and you really got to know people pretty quickly, and that, I feel, became the basis for me, you know, beginning to talk with people, learn what issues they were interested in, what issues I was interested in, and from that, if you're smart, you then build coalitions with people to be successful. So some people feel it's difficult to be successful in the House. I never felt that way. I always was very successful in passing legislation and getting things into the budget, in being an advocate. And so, you know, by contrast, the Senate is 40 people, so people assume that that will be an easier time with fewer people. That may well be, but I guess I consider myself to be at an advantage because I already have the background in the House. I know most of the members, a lot of the staff people. And again, for you to be successful, you have to convince not just your body, but the House and the governor's office to get what you need to get done in either legislation or in the budget. So I do consider it an advantage to know so many people on the House side. There are some senators who have come in directly from the outside, and there's a steep learning curve, and you need to get to know people. So I plan to use it to my advantage.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good for our district.
Exactly.
Could you give us your impression of the state's 2 newest high-profile leaders, Governor Charlie Baker and Senate President Stan Rosenberg?
Sure. Well, I'll start with Stanley Rosenberg because I know him better. He has been a senator for many, many years, and I worked with him very closely in my freshman term because the whole equal marriage issue came up. And he was one of, there were maybe 30 of us that started out trying to uphold the Supreme Judicial Court decision, the Goodridge decision for equal marriage. And I found him to be just a brilliant man, a master tactician. He understood parliamentary procedure, just a brilliant but very humble person, very soft-spoken, very thoughtful. He did a great job of negotiating some very difficult bills, the redistricting bill, the gaming bill. He's done other economic development bills as well. I just see him as very good at understanding the give and take that's necessary for things to get done. Charlie Baker, I don't know as well, but I look forward to getting to know him and working with him collaboratively. I did have opportunity to meet him a number of times on the campaign trail over the summer and in the fall. I find him to be, a very smart man, very soft-spoken. Anyone who saw his press conferences during the blizzards know that he's a pretty soft-spoken guy, very fact-oriented. I have the sense that if you can make your case and you can back it up factually, that he'll give you fair consideration on things. His version of the budget was just released last week, and he's trying to come into a new governorship with trying to balance a budget that is out of whack. So I think he did a pretty fair job. And I look forward again to working with him, and because if he succeeds, it means that we've all succeeded and our state has succeeded.
Sure. That'll be important.
Mm-hmm.
We've touched lightly on MassHealth care, and I've been hearing a lot about potential changes to MassHealth care in the news, and I'm just curious what your insights are on what direction the state's healthcare system might be heading.
Right.
Are we going to have cuts? What might happen?
Right. So with Governor Baker's new budget that he put forth, the only discernible change in MassHealth was a commitment to more closely and annually looking at whether or not folks qualify for MassHealth. So as I mentioned, when the Health Connector wasn't working properly, the computer system, rather than dropping people who might have desperately needed assistance, the decision was made, a judgment call, to perhaps keep a broader number of folks on than might qualify. So I know that Governor Baker is committed to an annual redetermination of everyone on the MassHealth program just to be certain that people qualify for it. The only other minor piece that I'm aware of that he put in his budget last week was he decided to drop MassHealth coverage for chiropractic, which I don't think I agree with, because I feel as though chiropractors can help people manage pain, keep them off addictive opioids, and also, allow people to be able to avoid potential more expensive surgery. So I'm not sure that's where I would have sort of made a cut, but that's what I've heard so far. He hasn't really committed beyond that to what sort of changes are going to happen. I know that I did hear, wearing sort of my elder affairs hat, that a number of elder advocates went in and sat with him, and they made a commitment that they were not going to cut the personal care attendant budget. And so that's actually good news for low-income seniors that are on MassHealth that need help with personal care. And I believe they made a commitment not to cut the home care program as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
So it's still very much an open question, in what direction this will go. The governor had wanted the authority to unilaterally cut in MassHealth and make changes in the House and Senate. We're not willing to go for that when when we passed his budget balancing bill for this year.
Funding is at the heart of so many things, and you've touched already, I know, on the MBTA, but I was wondering, is tax increases what's needed to make improvements to our transit system, or where are we headed?
Right. Well, again, I think that will be a battle royale in the House and the Senate. I was really interested to go hear the Conservation Law Foundation come in and do an overview of the MBTA's budget. Interestingly enough, compared to 5 other major cities up and down the Northeast coast, the MBTA does the best job of all of them in terms of managing their pension fund. They have a higher percentage funded than any of the others. However, they also have, conversely, the highest amount of debt. It was interesting because in the press I'd heard, and I'm just beginning to really become fluent in this issue, that people were saying it was due to runaway expansion of the MBTA, that was the cause for all of this, when in fact what I learned was that 4% of their annual budget is going to expansion, to things like the Green Line project getting extended into Somerville, which by the way brings economic growth, and also the long-awaited ability to reach down into the South Coast. So I don't think there are any easy answers on it. I do think that there's going to need to be, I know the governor's taking a look at it right now. There will probably be some very hard decisions in terms of scaling some things back. But I also think that, at some point we're going to have a conversation about how we can better invest in the T to get them on better footing. And by the T, it's not just MBTA, it's the regional transit authorities that service our area as well. I mean, they've been lacking for a very long time. In order for anything to be saleable, it's really going to have to positively affect the whole state and not just the greater Boston area. But certainly we have commuters that are getting on the train every day, and with great frustration at delays, cancellations. Someone sent me an email yesterday saying, if you want to meet your constituents, come down to North Station at 5 o'clock. There are hundreds of us standing there waiting to get on a train.
Not good.
Yeah, it's not good.
Well, it's obvious to me that you and your staff are hard at work on our behalf. So all in all, would you say you're optimistic about going forward on all these committees and all this?
Yes, I worked for a time for State Treasurer Steve Grossman, and he used to talk about his father with the quote, to make optimism a way of life. And I love that quote because I think that you do need to have an optimistic sense that problems, while challenging, can always be figured out, and that it takes creativity, collaboration. You have to have some stick-to-itness, perseverance, which I have. So I always am feeling optimistic that there's a better way of doing things and of tackling issues.
Well, I'm very impressed with all that you've taken on, everything you have on your plate, and everything you've accomplished up until now. It's really heartwarming.
Thank you. Well, I would like to just say that my immediate predecessor, Barry Feingold, served this district so well over the last 4 years, and Sue Tucker before him, and I hope I can be half as good a senator as they both were.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you.
This concludes our spotlight on State Senator Barbara L'Italian. I'm Leslie Noymer. Thanks very much for watching.